The Galactic Council had ruled over the stars for hundreds of years, and it had brought together many races who had once fought for power, but now lived under one flag of unity and trade. But deep inside the great halls of the Council, greed was slowly spreading like a shadow that no one could stop, and it began when explorers found a distant planet named Varan, which held something no one had ever seen before because its mountains were rich with a rare mineral that could power ships, weapons, and shields far beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. And soon every world under the Council wanted it for themselves, even though it was supposed to be shared under law. The human ship Horizon Dawn was among the first to land there, under the command of Captain Daniel Harris, a man known for calm judgment and strong will, and his second-in-command, Olivia Brooks, who was young, but brave and smart. And the crew of the Horizon Dawn thought they were only there to study the planet. But soon they understood that they had walked into a storm that would change everything forever, when Daniel stepped onto the planet's red soil. For the first time, he looked around and saw a world untouched by cities or war, only silence and beauty. But their scans showed energy fields deep under the ground far stronger than anything they had seen before. And when they sent a message to the Council to report their finding, it was met not with curiosity, but with orders to hold their position and wait, which confused Daniel, because such silence was unusual from a group that usually celebrated discovery. A few days later, several Council ships arrived, but not with scientists. They came with armed soldiers and mining equipment. The commander of those ships refused to explain his orders. He only said that the planet was now under Council protection. Daniel knew what that meant. It meant that the greed of the powerful had already reached Varan. Olivia whispered that it did not feel right, and he agreed. So they began recording everything for their report because he wanted proof of what was really happening. It didn't take long before arguments began between the crews from different species. Some believed the humans had no right to claim the find, others accused the Council of lying about its purpose. Daniel tried to keep peace, but the tension was like fire under dry grass, ready to burn everything around. Soon a small fight broke out near one of the mining zones, and what began as shouting turned into weapons being drawn. When Daniel tried to stop them, shots were fired and several people were hurt. He ordered his people back to the ship and sent a message to the Council demanding they stop the operation, but he got no answer. Only silence. The humans stayed in orbit, watching helplessly as more warships arrived every day. The Council's greed was no longer hidden. It was open and dangerous. Olivia stood beside Daniel on the bridge and asked what they should do, and Daniel said that for now they would stay and watch, because if they left, no one would know what really happened below. After a week, strange signals started coming from the surface, as if something under the ground was alive. The sensors showed large energy movements moving toward the mining sites, and then without warning, the ground opened under one of the mining towers and swallowed it whole. The explosion that followed destroyed several ships nearby. Daniel ordered his crew to scan the area, and what they saw terrified them. A massive structure made of unknown metal was waking up under the planet's crust. It was not a natural formation. It was a machine, and it was sending signals into space. The Council ordered all ships to silence their channels and keep the discovery secret. But Daniel refused to hide what he had seen. He sent his full report back to Earth and to several allied worlds. He said that the Council's greed had unleashed something that might not stop. Once awakened, when the Council found out what he did, they accused him of breaking command and spreading false data. They demanded he surrender his ship, but Daniel knew that if he did, the truth would be buried forever. So he cut off contact and fled to the outer orbit. Olivia watched as the Council's fleet began to fight among themselves. Some ships claimed the planet should be protected. Others wanted to destroy it before the energy reached full strength. It was chaos, and the humans were caught in the middle. They saw ships from the same alliance shooting each other in confusion and fear. Soon the horizon was filled with fire and wreckage. Daniel's heart was heavy because he knew this was only the beginning. He told Olivia that wars never start with weapons. They start with greed and lies, and this was the biggest of them all. As the battle grew worse, the humans tried to rescue survivors from other ships. They brought aboard injured soldiers from different races and treated them without question, because Daniel believed that even in war, humanity should not lose its heart. One of the rescued engineers told them that the Council had already planned to claim Varennes entirely for itself, months before they even sent the humans there, and that the minerals were not just energy but could amplify mind control systems. Daniel could not believe it, but when they checked the data, it was true. The Council wanted to use Varennes to control entire worlds, not just with force, but with fear and obedience. He knew that if that plan succeeded, no one would ever be free again. Olivia asked what they could do against so many enemies, but Daniel said that the truth was stronger than any weapon. They just needed to survive long enough to spread it. More ships kept arriving, and soon the planet's orbit was full of debris and broken vessels. When the humans saw the Council's flagship appear, they knew it was over. For now, the flagship sent out an order declaring martial law on all surrounding systems and warned that any ship refusing to obey would be destroyed. Daniel ignored it and told his crew to go dark and drift in the shadow of the nearby moon while they watched the Council seize everything around Varennes. Below, the planet kept shaking as the structure inside continued to grow. It sent pulses of light that reached out like waves into the void. The crew did not know what it meant, but they all felt uneasy. Olivia said she could almost hear a faint humming, like a heartbeat coming through the ship's hull. Daniel told her to stay focused because they had more important things to worry about. But deep down he felt it too. It was like the planet was alive, waiting for the right moment to awaken again. When night came and the battle outside faded to silence, Daniel sat in the control room thinking about the future. He had always believed that humanity's place in the galaxy was to learn and build, not to fight. But now he realized that peace was fragile and that greed could destroy everything if left unchecked. He looked at the stars and said softly that the Council had made a mistake, that they could not contain what they had started, and that soon everyone would pay the price for it. Olivia listened quietly, knowing he was right, because once war begins, it never stops where it starts. It spreads and changes everything. It touches. The humans were alone but not afraid. They had seen enough to know that the galaxy was heading toward something far worse than a fight over minerals. It was heading toward a war that no one would be able to control. Daniel closed his eyes and promised himself that if war came, humanity would not be the cause of it, but they would make sure it ended with the truth, because no empire built on greed could last forever. And as the planet Varennes continued to glow beneath them like a sleeping beast, the humans waited for the dawn of the war that was now impossible to avoid. The silence after the battle around Varennes did not last long, because soon new fleets arrived from across the galaxy, each one carrying the banners of worlds that had once called each other allies, but now came with suspicion and fear. The Council tried to act as if it still had control, sending messages of peace while quietly moving warships into position and giving secret orders to claim what was left of the planet. Daniel Harris watched from the horizon dawn as more and more ships filled the sky above Varennes, and he knew that the fragile peace that had held for so long was gone forever. Olivia Brooks stood beside him, reading the incoming signals, and said that the Council was calling for all non-Council vessels to withdraw immediately or face consequences. Daniel looked at the message and deleted it without replying, because he knew they were already seen as enemies, and leaving now would only mean the truth would die with them. Their small crew was tired but determined. They repaired what they could and used the silence between transmissions to record everything they had seen. Daniel sent encrypted files to trusted contacts across space, hoping at least one would reach someone who still cared about peace below the planet. The energy fields continued to grow, and every few hours the scanners picked up strange pulses spreading into the void. Olivia said it was like the planet was calling something or someone, and Daniel did not disagree. He felt uneasy every time the readings spiked, and he wondered if the Council even understood what they had unleashed. He thought about warning them, but he knew they would never listen to a human captain, so instead he focused on protecting his crew and finding a way to survive. As the days passed, the situation worsened. Two Council factions began blaming each other for the disaster on Varennes. One accused the other of sabotaging mining equipment, while the other claimed they had tried to hide the planet's power. Soon their arguments turned to open threats, and within hours the first shots were fired in the darkness above the planet. Bright flashes of energy lit up the black sky as Council ships fought their own kind. The horizon dawn drifted quietly among the wreckage, trying to stay unseen. Daniel watched as massive cruisers tore each other apart, and he realized that this was not just a small fight. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Olivia looked at him and said softly that the council was destroying itself. Daniel nodded but said that in their destruction many innocent worlds would burn too. He sent out a distress signal hoping to warn nearby colonies, but it was jammed by the council itself. They wanted no one to know what was happening. Their lies would keep the galaxy blind. Daniel refused to let that happen, so he told his crew they would head toward the nearest neutral zone to broadcast the truth before they could leave. However, a group of council interceptors appeared on the radar heading straight for them. They had been found. Olivia took her post at the weapons console while Daniel ordered full power to shields the horizon. Dawn was smaller and faster, but it could not outgun a fleet. The first missile hit near the engine bay, shaking. The entire ship alarms blared and sparks flew across the bridge. Daniel ordered evasive maneuvers and Olivia returned fire with plasma bursts that hit one of the interceptors and tore it apart. But two more closed in. Their captain opened a channel, and his cold voice filled the air. He accused Daniel of treason and declared that the Horizon Dawn was under arrest. Daniel replied calmly that the council had no right to destroy those who told the truth. And before the man could answer, Olivia fired again, hitting the enemy ship directly in its reactor, and the explosion sent debris spinning into space. The remaining interceptor broke off to call for reinforcements. Daniel took the chance and ordered the jump engines to engage the Horizon. Dawn vanished into warp space, leaving the burning field behind when they reappeared near a small asteroid belt. The crew sighed in relief, but Daniel knew it was temporary. They had defied the council, and now every ship would be looking for them. Olivia checked the systems and said the reactor was unstable from the earlier hit, and they would need to find a place to repair. Soon Daniel nodded and decided to head toward a remote trading outpost known as Epsilon Reach. It was far from council, space, and full of smugglers and traders who asked no questions as they approached the outpost. Daniel told the crew to stay alert because they could not trust anyone there. Once they docked, they saw that the place was crowded with refugees and damaged ships. People from many worlds had fled the fighting that was spreading faster than anyone expected. Daniel listened to rumors in the station's cantina, and what he heard chilled him. The war had already begun across multiple sectors in Tyre. Colonies were rebelling against the council, accusing it of hiding the truth about Varen. Some even said that the council had used the minerals to build weapons that could erase whole fleets. Olivia returned from gathering supplies and told Daniel that agents were already looking for a human ship matching their description. Daniel decided they could not stay long. They refueled, repaired what they could, and prepared to leave, but before they could launch, a squad of soldiers entered the docking bay. Daniel saw their uniforms and recognized the council's insignia. They had found them. Olivia whispered that they should try to escape through the maintenance tunnels, but Daniel said it was too late. The soldiers opened fire, forcing the crew to take cover. Daniel fired back using a hand blaster while shouting for the others to get to the ship. The air filled with smoke and noise as lasers hit the walls. One of the crew members was hit, and Olivia dragged him aboard while Daniel covered her. Finally, the ship's ramp closed and the engines roared to life. The Horizon Dawn lifted off under fire and burst through the outpost's outer gates. The explosion from their engines sent debris flying everywhere. Once they reached open space, Daniel ordered another jump, but this time to a hidden coordinate. Only he knew it was an abandoned relay station from an old war far away from any patrol routes when they arrived. The silence of deep space surrounded them. Olivia treated the wounded, and Daniel sat at the command chair thinking about what had happened. He knew now that there was no turning back. The council had branded them as enemies, and the galaxy was slipping into chaos. He remembered the message he had sent before leaving Varen and wondered if anyone had received it. If someone somewhere would believe him. The crew gathered around as he spoke quietly, saying that they were no longer just explorers. They were witnesses to the truth, and that if they wanted peace, they would have to fight for it in their own way. Olivia asked what he planned to do next. Daniel said they would form alliances with any world willing to stand against the council, because the only way to stop a war was to expose the lies that began it. As the crew listened, they felt both fear and hope, because though they were few, they knew they were right. The Horizon Dawn began sending out secret messages across the old communication network calling for anyone who still believed in justice To join them days later, they received a reply from a small group calling themselves the Free Systems Union, who had seen their data and wanted to meet. Daniel agreed, and they set course for the meeting place in the Outer Rim. As they traveled, he looked out at the stars and said quietly to Olivia that this war was no longer about Varen. It was about every world that had been betrayed by the greed of the Council, and that humans might be the last hope to remind the galaxy what freedom truly meant. And as the horizon dawn disappeared into the darkness, Daniel knew that the fight ahead would be long and full of danger, but he was ready, because he had already seen what happened when good people stayed silent, and he would not let that happen again. The horizon dawn traveled through the dark regions of space, far from trade routes and patrol zones, because Daniel Harris knew that the Council's forces were still searching for them, and he could not risk leading them to anyone who still believed. In peace, the crew was exhausted, but they stayed strong because Daniel and Olivia Brooks gave them hope and purpose. They had lost many things already, but they still had each other and the truth, and sometimes that was enough to keep them going. The messages they had sent out to the Free Systems Union were answered, and now they were flying toward a secret meeting point near a dying star, where the few who dared to resist the Council gathered together. Daniel knew it was dangerous because spies were everywhere, but he also knew that the fight for freedom could not wait much longer. When they arrived at the meeting point, they saw small ships drifting quietly around a massive abandoned freighter that had been turned into a base. Daniel sent a coded signal and received permission to dock. As they entered the hangar, they were met by a group of humans and aliens wearing simple armor with no insignia. One of them stepped forward, a tall man with gray hair and scars across his face, who introduced himself as Commander Leon. He said that the Free Systems Union was not an army, but a group of worlds who refused to follow the Council's greed. Daniel shook his hand and said that was enough, because what mattered now was not who had the biggest fleet, but who had the courage to stand for what was right. They walked together through the dim corridors and talked about what was happening across the galaxy. Leon said that entire sectors were now in open rebellion, some because they were tired of the Council's lies and others because they wanted power for themselves. Trade routes were closed. Communications were jammed, and millions of people were caught between fleets that no longer cared who lived or died. Olivia listened quietly and asked if anyone still believed in peace. Leon smiled sadly and said that peace was now a story people told their children, but maybe together they could make it real again. Daniel showed them the data from Varen and the recordings of the Council's secret transmissions. When the others saw the proof of how the Council had caused the disaster, they were shocked. Some even cried, because they had lost families and homes to a war built on lies. Daniel told them that hiding was no longer enough. They needed to stand and show the galaxy the truth. Leon agreed, but said that their resources were small. They had only a few ships and hidden bases scattered across the rim. Daniel said that humanity had always survived by doing what others thought impossible, and that they would find a way to fight smart, not big. After hours of talking, they formed a plan. Daniel would take the Horizon Dawn to intercept a convoy carrying stolen minerals from Varen that the Council planned to weaponize. If they could capture it, they would have proof and maybe even tools to stop the war. Olivia prepared the crew while Daniel spoke one last time with Leon, who warned him that spies were everywhere and betrayal could come from anyone. Daniel thanked him and said he was ready for whatever came next. As the Horizon Dawn left the freighter, the crew was silent, each one lost in thought. The stars outside looked calm, but they all knew that death could be waiting behind any shadow. Olivia checked the scanners and said the convoy was heading toward the Yara sector, escorted by 3 warships. Daniel smiled slightly and said that meant the Council was nervous, because if they sent 3 ships, it meant what they carried was important. The Horizon Dawn moved through an asteroid field using its small size to stay hidden. Soon the convoy came into view, a line of large cargo ships surrounded by heavy cruisers. Daniel gave the order to cut engines and drift closer, slowly, like a ghost, moving through darkness. When they were close enough, Olivia sent a burst of interference to confuse the enemy radar. Then the Horizon Dawn jumped forward and fired 2 precise shots that hit the engines of the nearest cargo ship before the enemy could react. The humans were already moving. Daniel told Olivia to jam communications while they boarded the disabled ship. The crew suited up and crossed through the airlock, weapons ready. The corridors inside were dark and filled with smoke. Daniel led the way, finding frightened crew members who surrendered quickly when they saw who he was. One of them said the cargo they carried was dangerous. Not just minerals, but something else that pulsed with strange energy. Daniel forced the door open to the main bay, and what he saw made his heart race. Inside were containers glowing faintly with the same light they had seen on Varen. And inside one of the larger pods was a piece of machinery still alive and moving. Olivia scanned it and said, the readings were identical to the structure under the planet. Daniel realized that the Council was not just mining Varen. They were taking parts of it, like a living being tearing pieces from its body to turn into weapons. He ordered the crew to take what data they could and destroy the rest before they could finish. The alarms blared. The enemy cruisers had found them and were closing in. Daniel shouted for everyone to return to the ship. They barely made it back before the first shots hit the hull. The Horizon Dawn turned hard and fired back its plasma cannons, lighting up the dark. The enemy ship surrounded them, but Daniel refused to surrender. Olivia rerouted power from the life support to the shields, giving them a small chance. Daniel used it to dive into the asteroid belt again. Hiding among the rocks, explosions filled the void as the cruisers fired blindly, trying to flush them out. Daniel waited until they were close, then ordered a full burn toward the largest asteroid. The Horizon Dawn passed dangerously near its surface, and at the last second Daniel released several mines. The enemy followed, and when the mines exploded, the shockwave tore through the cruisers, destroying two. Instantly, the third one limped away, its engines dying. Daniel let it go because he knew chasing it would only waste time they needed to survive. They set course back to the Free Systems Union base, but before they left, Olivia detected a strange signal coming from the captured cargo. It was transmitting something through space. Daniel tried to stop it, but it was too late. Somewhere out there, someone or something had received the message. He looked at the glowing container and felt cold, because he realized the structure on Varen was not dead. It was awake and aware, and now it knew who they were. When they finally returned to Leon's base, the others greeted them with relief, but Daniel told them there was no time to celebrate. He showed them the data proving the Council was building living weapons from Varen's material. Leon stared at the recordings and said that the Council had gone mad. Olivia added that the signal they had intercepted could mean the machines were spreading across other worlds and that the Council had lost control of them. Daniel said that meant the war was about to get worse, because now it was not just about power. It was about survival. He stood before the gathered captains and said that if they wanted to save the galaxy, they would have to unite even those who hated each other. Before Leon agreed, and said that from this day the Free Systems Union would no longer hide, they would fight. Daniel looked around and saw hope return to tired faces. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he felt something he had not felt since the day he first joined the Council years ago. He felt purpose again as he looked out at the stars. He whispered to Olivia that the Council had started a war they could not contain, and that soon the galaxy would know what humans could do when pushed to the edge, because he was ready to fight not just for humanity, but for everyone who still believed in freedom. The war had now spread across half the galaxy, and what began as a dispute over one planet had turned into a storm that no one could stop, because every world had taken sides, and the Council was no longer a symbol of peace, but a crumbling empire built on lies. Daniel Harris and the crew of the Horizon Dawn had become known among rebels and outcasts as the voice of truth. They carried with them the evidence of the Council's crimes and the knowledge that the machines from Varen were spreading through space like seeds of destruction. The Free Systems Union that once hid in the shadows had grown under Daniel's guidance, and now small fleets from many races flew together, carrying one shared goal: to bring down the Council before it destroyed everything. Daniel stood on the bridge of the Horizon Dawn, watching a hologram of the current battle maps glowing before him, as Olivia Brooks reported that dozens of systems were rising against their rulers, and that the Council was losing control faster than expected. Daniel knew this was good news, but he also knew that chaos was a dangerous ally, because if the war went too far, there would be nothing left to save. Olivia said the latest transmissions showed that several Council worlds had gone dark and that no signals were coming out. Daniel feared that meant the machines had reached them and were now consuming their worlds like a disease. They had to move fast. The Free Systems Union held a meeting through secure channels where Leaders from all over spoke of their victories and losses. Some wanted to strike directly at the Council's homeworld, while others wanted to secure their borders. First, Daniel listened, and then said that they had only one chance if they wanted. To win, they had to show the truth to everyone at once, the proof of what the Council had done and what Varen truly was. Leon agreed, and said that their best chance would be to hack the Council's central broadcast network on Kareth Prime and send the message to every world in real time. It was a plan so dangerous that even the bravest hesitated, but Daniel said he would lead it himself, because he had seen what the Council was capable of, and he would not let them hide anymore. Olivia supported him without question. She knew he would never ask anyone to do what he was not willing to do himself. So the plan was set. They would gather a small strike team of ships fast enough to break through the blockade around Kareth Prime, and once inside, they would transmit the message and expose the truth for all to see. The following days were filled with preparation. Engineers worked night and day to upgrade the Horizon Dawn, fitting it with stealth plating and stronger shields. Pilots volunteered to join the mission knowing they might never return. Daniel walked among them, talking to each one not as a commander, but as a friend. He thanked them for their courage and promised that whatever happened, their fight would not be forgotten. When the time came, the small fleet jumped into warp space, leaving behind the safety of their allies as they neared Kareth Prime. The stars stretched into lines and then snapped back into view, revealing the massive planet glowing with the light of thousands of orbital stations and warships. The Council's defense fleet was waiting. Daniel ordered the Horizon Dawn to drop out of warp behind a cluster of moons, using them as cover. Olivia activated the stealth field, and the ship disappeared from sensors, while the rest of their fleet fanned out to draw enemy attention. The first explosions flashed across the sky as their allies clashed with the Council's forces. Daniel's heart pounded, but his voice stayed calm. He guided the ship through debris, fields, and narrow channels between enemy fire. The closer they got to the surface, the more resistance they met. Missiles streaked past their hull, and shock waves shook the decks. Olivia shouted that shields were failing, but Daniel said to keep going, because this was their only chance. When they finally reached the edge of the atmosphere, the main defense tower opened fire with a beam that could cut a cruiser in half. Daniel ordered full power to engines and dove through the storm clouds. The beam grazed the side of the Horizon Dawn, burning deep scars into the metal. But the ship held together as they broke through into the lower orbit. They saw the capital city of Kareth Prime below, glowing like a jewel surrounded by flames. Daniel told Olivia to prepare the broadcast system while he maneuvered the ship to hover over the central communication array. But before they could begin, the Council's flagship appeared, rising from behind the planet like a shadow of death. Its weapons locked onto them, and its commander demanded they surrender. Daniel recognized the voice. It was Admiral Varek, the same man who had attacked them near Varen months ago. Daniel opened the channel and said that surrender was no longer an option because the truth was coming whether the Council liked it or not. Varek laughed and said that humans had always been troublemakers and that he would end their story today. Daniel cut the channel and told Olivia to begin transmission as the Horizon Dawn dodged heavy fire. Olivia worked quickly, connecting cables and rerouting. Power sparks flew around her as systems overloaded. She shouted that the connection was unstable. Daniel said to use all reserve power, even if it meant the engines would die, because this was their moment. Outside, the battle grew worse. Their escort ships were being destroyed one by one. But they held the line long enough for the Horizon Dawn to finish what it started. Olivia pressed the final command, and the message went out across the galaxy. Every screen, every channel, every device that could receive a signal began to show the recordings of the Council's greed, the mining on Varen, the secret weapons, the lies, and the destruction that followed. The truth spread faster than light, reaching soldiers, civilians, and leaders alike. For the first time, everyone saw what the war was really about, and anger filled the stars. Fleets began turning on their masters. Soldiers refused orders, and entire systems declared independence from the Council. Varek realized too late what had happened. He ordered his flagship to destroy the Horizon Dawn. But before he could fire, the combined fleet of rebels that had followed Daniel out of warp arrived and surrounded him. The battle that followed was the largest the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from both sides fought in chaos. But now the people knew the truth, and they fought not for greed but for freedom. Daniel's ship was hit again and again. Olivia was thrown to the floor, but she pulled herself back up, shouting that the message had been received by every major system. Daniel smiled even as alarms screamed around him. He knew they had done it. The Council's lies were broken. He ordered the crew to evacuate, but most refused, saying they would stay until the end together. They turned the Horizon Dawn toward the flagship, and Daniel said quietly that this was for every world the Council had destroyed. The ship charged forward, its weapons blazing as fire. Surrounded them, they rammed into the enemy's side, and the explosion lit up the entire sky as the flagship broke apart, and the Council's command structure fell into chaos. The remaining rebel ships took control of the orbit, and the battle slowly ended with the Council defeated and leaderless. The cost was heavy, but the war had turned. Olivia woke later in a medical bay of one of their allied ships, bruised but alive. She asked about Daniel and the crew, but the answer was silence. She looked out at the stars and saw the wreckage of the Horizon Dawn drifting in the distance, a quiet monument to their victory. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled because she knew Daniel had given the galaxy what it needed most, the truth. And even though the war was not yet over, the balance had shifted forever. The Council's greed had lit the fire, but the courage of a few had turned it into light that could never be hidden again. The galaxy was quiet for the first time in years, and the stars no longer burned with the light of war. The great fleets that once fought for control now drifted in silence among the wreckage of fallen empires, and the Council that had ruled for centuries was gone. Its towers reduced to ruins. On Kareth Prime, the people had taken back their freedom. But peace was not easy, because without the Council, there was no one to hold the worlds together, and every system was trying to rebuild in its own way. Olivia Brooks stood on the deck of a new ship called the Horizon's Echo, built from the remains of the old Horizon Dawn. She looked out at the stars and thought of Daniel Harris and the crew, who had given everything for the truth. She missed their laughter, the sound of Daniel's calm voice during battle, and the way he always believed that humanity could bring light to even the darkest parts of the galaxy. Now she carried that belief alone as the new leader of the Free Systems Union. She spent her days meeting with leaders from dozens of worlds, trying to shape a future that would not fall back into greed. The Union's fleet was smaller now, but strong in purpose, and made up of many species who had once been enemies. They worked together to rebuild planets damaged by war, bringing food, medicine, and technology to those in need. Olivia's ship became a symbol of hope wherever it went, and she traveled constantly, speaking to crowds and reminding them that unity was the only path forward. But not everyone agreed. There were still warlords and ex-council officers who wanted power. Again, they gathered followers, promising safety in exchange for obedience. They called themselves the Restoration, and said the galaxy needed order, even if it meant losing freedom. Olivia knew this fight was not over, because greed never truly died. It only changed shape one evening, while the Horizon's Echo orbited a half-ruined colony world. Leon came to her and said that their scouts had discovered a signal deep in the outer rim. It was faint and old, but human in origin. Olivia asked what kind of signal it was, and Leon said it carried Daniel's command codes. Olivia froze, unable to believe what she had heard. She ordered the ship to change course immediately, heading for the source of the transmission. The crew followed without question, because they all loved Daniel and owed their lives to him. The journey took days through broken warp routes and empty sectors where debris fields stretched for light years. When they finally arrived, they found an asteroid belt glowing faintly with the wreckage of old ships. At the center of it was a derelict vessel, torn apart, but still holding power. Olivia's heart raced as they scanned it. The computer confirmed that it was the Horizon Dawn, or what was left of it. She ordered a boarding team to go with her. Despite Leon's warning that it could be dangerous, they entered the broken hull and floated through dark corridors, filled with silence and drifting dust. Everything was destroyed, and yet something still hummed deep inside the ship. Olivia followed the faint signal until she reached the main control room, and there she saw it, the core computer still active, flickering. With weak light, she approached it and placed her hand on the console. The system recognized her and played a final message. Daniel's voice filled the air, calm and steady as always. He said that if anyone found this message, it meant they had survived, and that he was proud of them. He spoke of the future and said that power should never belong to a few but to all, and that the truth must be guarded, because lies will always return. He said that humanity's role was not to rule, but to remind the galaxy what courage really means. The message ended with his final words telling Olivia to live, not in sorrow, but in hope. Olivia stood there with tears in her eyes and whispered that she would never let his dream die. She downloaded the data core and returned to the ship carrying the last piece of Daniel's legacy. When they returned to Union space, the news of the discovery spread quickly. People across many systems listened to Daniel's final message, and it reignited something in them, the feeling that they were all part of something bigger. The message was replayed in schools, on colony squares, and even in the halls of governments. It became a guiding light for the new age. The Union began to grow again. More worlds joined under the promise of equality and cooperation, and the Restoration started to lose support, because people began to see that order built on fear could never last. Olivia worked day and night traveling to worlds that still suffered. She helped rebuild cities, restored trade routes, and sent peacekeepers to prevent more wars wherever she went. People spoke Daniel's name with respect and gratitude. Sometimes she would look up at the stars and imagine that he was still out there watching over them. One day, a mysterious ship arrived at the Union capital, carrying envoys from a distant system that had remained isolated during the war. They said they wanted to join the Union and offered to share their knowledge of energy technology. But what surprised everyone was that the envoys said they had once been allies of the machines from Varen but had broken free from their control. They warned that not all of the machines had been destroyed, and that deep in the uncharted sectors, something was rebuilding itself. Olivia listened carefully. She knew this peace might only be temporary because history had shown that darkness always tried to return. But this time the galaxy was not blind. The people were united and aware. She thanked the envoys and promised that they would stand together if that threat ever rose again. After the meeting, she stood alone on the balcony of the Union Hall, watching the night sky filled with 1,000 moving lights of ships traveling between worlds. She thought of how far they had come from the days when the Council's greed nearly consumed everything. She whispered softly that humans had once been seen as dangerous, but now they had become the protectors of peace, the ones who reminded others what it meant to fight not for conquest but for justice. The horizon was endless, and Olivia felt that Daniel's dream had become real through every person who believed in something better. She returned to her ship, the Horizon's Echo, and as they left orbit, she looked back one last time at the glowing world behind them and smiled, knowing that even if more battles came, they would face them together, because this time the galaxy was ready to defend itself, not with fear, but with truth. The stars stretched before her, endless and silent, and for the first time in a long time she felt at peace, because she knew Daniel's legacy would live forever, carried not in monuments or weapons, but in the hearts of those who refused to bow to greed again. And as the Horizon's Echo disappeared into the light of a new sunrise across the stars, the galaxy began to heal, and hope finally returned to the places where war once lived, and the long night was over for good.